Hey, everybody. I'm Mike Fanone, and you're watching another edition of the Mike Fanone Show. We've got Peter on as well, my brother from another mother. And again, you know him as Mr. Earth Rebirth, but there's Andrew, the third member of our team. So we're here to answer your questions, talk a bunch of shit. I'm drinking fucking beer because it's been that kind of a day. And yeah. What's going on? It's been a busy. Is a retort just stupid to fucking say it's been a busy news cycle? We had some good stories that came out this week. You guys should check it out on my YouTube channel, the Michael Fanone Show. What do we cover today? I did a video on. Yesterday was Hakeem Jeffries, and we probably should have. The story was really Hakeem Jeffries' comments about, it's not going to be a Democratic priority going into the midterms or after the midterms to pursue impeaching Donald Trump or his cabinet, which is absolutely, utterly insane to me. I would have told you probably 6 months ago that Hakeem Jeffries should just step down from leadership but stay in Congress. He's just not the man for the moment. But now I'm like, you need to fucking resign from Congress. Take your happy ass down the road and do something else, because not only are you not the man for the moment to lead this party going into the midterms and potentially being the speaker on the other side of the midterms, but you don't belong in Congress because you don't understand what's happening in this country right now. And you just, and the other thing is like, these feigned attempts at trying to be tough. If you're a bitch, just say you're a bitch. It's the lyrics to a Stout song. But, just get out, dude. You and Chuck Schumer, get the fuck out.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that they can't walk and chew gum at the same time, that like there can only be one message and one priority. There's affordability should absolutely be a priority, but why can't accountability is actually directly connected to affordability, because the corruption that we're seeing right now from the administration is costing us a shit ton of money. All of the insider trading, all of the deals that from the Middle East that Trump and Jared Kushner and everything are negotiating, all of that stuff is hurting us. The illegal war in Iran that was never consulted with Congress and never received the support of the American people is costing us a shit ton of money for affordability. So accountability is part of that message. And accountability means holding them to account and prosecuting them for what they are doing that is illegal. Because otherwise, you're just giving him a blank check and saying, you can do whatever the fuck you want, and we're not going to come for you. We're just going to go about affordability. There's ways.
The other thing I don't understand is this is the exact same strategy that they applied in the aftermath of the insurrection at the Capitol. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden's elected, he assumes office, and his overwhelming strategy was, and the strategy of the Department of Justice was, let's just lower the temperature of the country and let bygones be bygones, and just try to heal and hold hands and move forward as a country. And what ended up happening was, we talked about this in the episode, authoritarianism metastasized in this country. And Republicans recognized Democratic leadership's weaknesses, and they exploited them. And we ended up with Trump 2.0. And everybody that experienced Trump 1.0 understood that Trump 2.0 was going to be exactly what it is, a revenge tour. Donald Trump's revenge on America. I mean, he's even exacting revenge on his own supporters. And I think that kind of leads us into the other story we covered today, which was, this kind of both sidesism that we're seeing play out in the media. We highlighted, I don't want to give all of it away, but, we highlighted this interview that I don't know if you guys caught it with Dana Bash and Congressman Jamie Raskin over the weekend on, I think it was the show State of the Union on CNN. I haven't watched CNN in like 2 years, but I did catch that highlight in this bizarre exchange in which she asked Jamie Raskin if he felt responsible for this assassination attempt on the president, alleged assassination attempt on the president, and because rhetoric that was used by Democrats, and it was almost comical. Raskin's reaction was completely, he was perplexed. What rhetoric are you talking about? Calling an authoritarian, and essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, but her argument was, you guys are being mean. You're being mean by calling them mean things like fascist, like Nazis, like authoritarians, saying that they're an existential threat to democracy, when that's exactly what the fuck they are. They're all of those things. If you don't want to be called a Nazi, don't be a fucking Nazi.
Exactly.
Yeah. It blows my mind. And we talked about it in like this capitulation on behalf of the media, and shame on Dana Bash and shame on CNN, because all you're doing is you're enabling the continuation of the normalization of political violence in this country. And as somebody who, experienced that firsthand, it pisses me off. And so, fuck her and fuck them. And I hope nobody that watches my show watches CNN. That's definitely one entertainment network that deserves, to go the way of the dodo bird.
Yeah, and there was a question I saw about of James Comey's recent indictment, because we just actually put another episode about that last night, Michael. But if you want to talk a little bit about kind of the 30,000 foot view, not just the indictment itself, but even like the surprise. We've always talked about how grand juries will indict a ham sandwich, and I was actually surprised that the grand jury let this through, because it's still on its face a bullshit case.
Yes and no. I mean, yes, the grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. That is a fact. I have testified before countless grand juries, and I've also sat on grand juries in the District of Columbia as a jurist. That being said, we have already seen examples of, and I'd point to, the prosecution of Letitia James and James Comey, the first go around in the Eastern District of Virginia, when the Trump selected, I forget her name. Was it Harrigan? I can't remember. Elise something or other. Anyway, she was the Trump selected prosecutor that actually handled the grand jury herself, which is something unheard of. That I think she was the acting, assistant United States attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, that she would actually go into the grand jury herself. And then it came out afterwards that she essentially withheld evidence from the grand jurors. And that there was a lot of abnormalities, and that many of them arose to the level of alleged criminal conduct on her behalf, certainly unethical conduct.
And there's Lindsay Halligan.
Yeah, Lindsay Halligan. And then she was removed. And so I question, anytime one of these indictments come down, I question the same thing, with regards to Don Lemon's indictment. And I certainly question this indictment, which is utterly insane.
Deirdre Off-Brand said Comey's indictment looks like it was written by a 4-year-old in crayon.
Yes, they all do.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't know if anybody caught the press conference with Kash Patel, in which he talked about this lengthy investigation that played out over the course of 10 months. 10 months of investigation going into a singular photo that was posted by James Comey to one of his social media accounts, in which he described it as an interesting scene on the beach today. And that was it. And then after he received, some backlash or people that were questioning the meaning behind it, he took it down. And so that warranted 10 months of fucking investigation. I've seen homicide investigations that went faster than fucking that. So get the fuck out of here. That's total utter bullshit. The timing of this, it's not just suspect. The timing of this is everything. His daughter just won a lawsuit against the administration because she was, fired from her position as a assistant United States attorney, or removed from her position as assistant United States attorney unlawfully. And this is, retaliation for that. Not to mention the fact that I think, this administration is just going to continue to weaponize the Department of Justice and any federal law enforcement agencies against Donald Trump's political enemies. It's going to go on and on and on and on, which is another reason why Democrats should pursue investigations and impeachment to stop that behavior. There are American citizens. James Comey is an American citizen who has served this country well. Maybe made some questionable decisions during his tenure as a FBI director, but he's certainly a man of integrity. And I don't believe that he was politically motivated in his decision-making process. Could be wrong. Regardless, he's somebody who dedicated decades of his life to serving the country.
Usually a good sign of that is if you piss off both sides, then you're probably onto something in terms of being a person of integrity. Absolutely.
And I agree with that, especially as a former law enforcement officer. I mean, that's kind of what you should be fucking doing. Mm-hmm. I just, while Democratic leadership stands idly by and does nothing and promises to do nothing going after the midterms, it's not just, people always jump on me. They're like, oh, they're not in power. They don't have any, authority. And we talked about this in the story. You have the bully pulpit. You have these huge platforms. Your elected officials, your members of Congress, your senators. You could be going out there talking to the media, keeping this message alive, that what's happening right now is outrageous. It's unconstitutional. It's illegal, unethical, immoral, all of those things. But what do we get from leadership? We get a promise that we're just going to focus on kitchen table fucking issues, and we're not going to pursue any type of accountability for the crimes that are being committed against American citizens.
Right.
James Comey, I don't know what his financial situation is. I mean, I know he's a civil servant. Yes, he was at the highest level of the FBI, but even then, what do they make, like $200,000 a year? And ain't a fuck ton of money to be blowing it on, frivolous lawsuits being filed by your former employer against you for nonsense. Yeah. Nobody should have to, fund that type of a legal defense.
Yeah, if they got a problem with the idea that this is like diluting a primary message, but tie it into the primary message. Like this stuff, the lack of accountability is fucking up your kitchen table. Yeah. So tie it into the thing that, it's just ridiculous. This idea that it's a zero-sum game, that if you talk about two things at once, that the people will feel like, oh, I don't know what they're focused on. It feels like it's all over the place. It's not at all. And it's also the number one priority and should be until these people are brought to justice.
Well, I mean, the other thing too is, it's members of Congress's responsibility to go back to their congressional districts, and educate their constituents as to what's happening in Washington. That's literally why the fuck they're there.
Yep.
And so they should be going back and saying, hey, listen, these are the things that are happening in Washington today. And they are, systemic attacks against democracy, against the rule of law, against all of the institutions that, that we recognize as being pillars of our democracy. And so we've got to fight this fight. But don't worry, because there's literally hundreds of us. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so we're going to also push forward legislation to try to bring down these costs. Many of them are associated, like you were saying, Peter, with the unlawful behavior of this administration and the corruption attributed to this administration. So they're actually intertwined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, put the money from that ballroom back into the hands of the people who are paid taxpayer dollars to have it actually benefit their lives, not to have it be, they got private funding here and there, but they're also supplementing it with taxpayer dollars. I want to keep moving with the Q&A. So what else you got for us, Andrew?
We'll go ahead and throw up this next one. It says, my question, are there other former police officers doing what you are doing to protect America from the likes of you-know-who? I mean.
There's listen, Harry Dunn has been out there, Aquilina Ganell. I do get it's actually interesting. The past couple of weeks, I've had quite a few former law enforcement officers reach out to me, and every city that we go to, when there's security provided by like state and local law enforcement, I mean, they'll reach out to me and say, like, hey, we totally support what you're doing. And I understand like the reluctance to come forward. And also, just like a lot of Americans, whether they're law enforcement or not, they don't believe that they can make a difference. But it has been incredibly disappointing that, more officers that had similar experiences to mine on January 6th didn't come forward at the outset. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that everybody that was in that position had a responsibility to do what I'm doing. But it would be nice to have some other cops out there talking about, how fucked up this situation is, and giving a law enforcement perspective as to, the way that that this administration is abusing federal law enforcement, the Department of Justice, how they've weaponized it against the American people. They literally had a weaponization of law enforcement division in the Department of Justice. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where the fuck they're at.
Obviously, they see what happens when you speak out, and it's not like it's fucking easy. It's countless death threats. It's suddenly you're controversial. They will experience tension, and across their lives, they'll probably lose. If they were still working with the police, they'll probably be pushed into a corner and then told to leave. It certainly comes with fucking sacrifices.
Well, and like I'll talk, at an institutional level, I think there's a lot of law enforcement agencies across the country that embrace this administration because, again, like I have said, literally since day one, law enforcement officers and agencies are not the stewards of our democracy. And what I mean by that is that, as a law enforcement officer, listen, I was aware of the Constitution. I did my best not to violate people's civil rights, but I didn't look at it as anything other than an impediment for me to do my job. And that's absolutely the wrong approach to have, but that's part of, the culture and, kind of the it's just instilled in you through the course of your career. I think that that willingness on this administration's part to cut corners, at best, at worst, to just out and out violate people's constitutional rights and trample all over them, and in some instances, literally execute them. I think that there are a lot of law enforcement agencies that that are willing to stay silent because they see it as a valuable opportunity or an opportunity to to fight crime without having to be accountable for their missteps and their constitutional violations.
Mm-hmm.
This is a good one that goes with that. It says, how effective do you feel things like Coffee with a Cop community outreach efforts are, and how can we do better to foster trust in LEOs instead of fear?
I mean, yes, I think they're important. I think it's important for agencies to engage with the community as much as humanly possible. I mean, there is the actual program of community policing which, the idea behind it, I agree with. The actual program itself, I mean, there were a lot of things there that I thought were questionable or unreasonable, or just ineffective. But the idea of, I mean, there's nothing more fundamental to law enforcement than the relationship between law enforcement officers and law enforcement agencies and the community that they serve. If there's no trust there, then, because law enforcement is more than just cops hitting the streets and making arrests. And I learned that, early on. Like, I can make an arrest, but if the community doesn't trust me, then when I go into the grand jury to testify to get an indictment, the grand jury is not going to vote a true bill, and they're going to dismiss the indictment. Or if I have a case that goes to trial and the jury doesn't trust law enforcement, then all those law enforcement witnesses that come before them and testify that they don't believe, and they ended up finding the person not guilty. Well, that might not be a direct reflection on me as an officer, but it's certainly a reflection on my agency and on, the greater relationship that we as law enforcement officers have with our community. And that's a problem. That's not making anybody safer, and it's wasting literally millions of taxpayer dollars pursuing criminal charges against people in a community that doesn't trust law enforcement to begin with. And so, fundamentally, you need to have a relationship with the community, which is also another reason why I think that there should no longer be, like in New York and a lot of places, there's civilian oversight of law enforcement agencies. The chief of police is actually not the highest ranking law enforcement official in those jurisdictions. Like in Washington, D.C., the chief of police is the highest ranking law enforcement official at the Metropolitan Police Department. It shouldn't be that way. You should have a civilian executive overseeing that position. I think they would be beneficial that they came from a law enforcement background, but they should be a civilian. And they should be accountable to the mayor. They should be accountable to the city council, and they should be accountable to the people. And that's just the way that that these things should be. I think that, the only way that you gain trust is with real accountability and oversight that's answerable to, to the people that live in that community.
And also, you've mentioned this before, but talking about the police officers in urban areas and the importance of actually living in the community that you're policing and having a relationship with that place. Because if the only engagement that you have is on a shift, seeing usually the worst of what humanity has to offer from that place, you might associate it with something very different from your lived experience when you're off duty, and then can create a sense of bias and a lack of belief in the community you're serving.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to understand the communities that you're policing. You have to be able to have a level of empathy and compassion for these communities. And I think that, the best way to go into the job having that is to come from the community to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one focused on California. Have you heard of the fake fraud audit of Prop 50 in California? They're trying to overturn the gerrymandering vote like Virginia.
Also, we love Kyoko. Shout out to, you're always here. You're always ready with questions. So thanks for being here.
I have not heard about Prop 50 in California, but I am well aware of the attempts to overturn the vote in Virginia. I don't even, where are we at? I was trying to Google that today to see like where exactly we were in Virginia with that. I know that they had blocked it originally, and that Jay Jones, the Attorney General for the state of Virginia, had filed an appeal. And I heard that the Supreme Court of Virginia had turned down the appeal or denied the appeal.
Yeah, Virginia's Supreme Court upholds block on redistricting certification. And it, let's see. Yeah, apparently saying the judge handling this case sounds skeptical about the Virginia redistricting fight hearing. I mean, it's wild to me that obviously everybody knew that this was what they were voting for. The Virginia people voted in favor of it, and it's also a temporary measure. And I am not an expert on the Virginia state constitution, but if it's flying in those Republican states and getting through and not being blocked, I don't understand why it would be an issue here.
Yeah.
It's far more constitutional than what Texas has been doing. So,
well, I think this kind of ties into, Kyoko, into a bigger story that came out yesterday or today. Is the Supreme Court essentially gutting the Voting Rights Act of, what was it, 1965, in which, it was Justice Clarence Thomas, in his fucking infinite wisdom, who said that, it should have never been interpreted that districts should be drawn to appropriately represent racial demographics. And so, essentially what he was saying is that having districts that allow for appropriate representation of communities of color, I mean, that's what we're talking about here, vulnerable communities, that is unconstitutional, and that it should have never been interpreted that way by previous Supreme Court justices. And so now, I think that's going to call into question. I mean, I'm certain that there's going to be legal arguments that are made in these, redistricting cases, even if they have really no bearing on, what the actual motivation behind the redistricting effort was to begin with. They'll be filing it just to prolong the implementation of these, redistricting alignments.
Yeah, but you just look at all you have to look at is the maps themselves, and when they look like a bunch of scribbles with curved lines that are going across the state to clearly envelop a certain demographic of people that benefits the party that is writing those lines, it's just absurd. And obviously, we're trying to fight fire with fire right now and saying, like, nobody wants gerrymandering from the Democratic Party. What we want is a fair state of play. But if things are going to be gerrymander the fuck in those red states, then we're not going to just lose the House because they did an extreme thing. We need to match them, and ideally, none of the gerrymandering should be happening by both sides.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, the messaging certainly has been piss poor, both at the national level, but also at the state and local level. In Virginia, obviously, this was an effort in part to, counter Donald Trump's demands from Republican governors to gerrymander their own states so that he can get more seats to maintain control of the House. Why? Because he knows that his policies are atrocious and that the vast majority of Americans disapprove. In fact, the vast majority of Americans have gone so far as to elect Donald Trump as the most hated president in American history. His approval ratings are lower than even what's his name before Reagan, the peanut farmer,
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter. Yeah. So, congratulations, Donald Trump. America hates you, and so does most of the world. But that
more than Nixon.
Yeah, that was a response to that, but it was also a response to previous gerrymandering efforts by Republican governor in the state of Virginia, who drew these district maps in exactly the way that you described, Peter. It was like they made no sense. They weren't along geographical boundaries. They made no sense based on communities. They split residential neighborhoods, communities, towns, in the middle, a third, a quarter. They did everything that they could do to benefit Republicans. And so what these the redistricting effort in Virginia did, first, it was voted on by Virginians, approved, and second, it would create district maps that are competitive. They're not even favoring Democrats. They're just competitive because they make sense based off of geographical boundaries and based off of community boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. This goes along with this question because somebody in Canada kind of wanting a little clarification. If I'm a Democrat and I live in a red state, can I just vote for the candidate I chose?
If you're a Democrat and you live in a red state, can you vote for the candidate you choose?
That's going to be
this is more of a civics lesson for American politics, but you can absolutely vote for the candidate in your district who aligns with you. The issue is that your vote will likely be drowned out by a gerrymandered district where the lines are so extreme that they have artificially created a Republican stronghold that would.
And I'll give like a really simple, basic example. Take some place like Richmond, Virginia, where it's relatively urban. This is a city. It's the capital of the state of Virginia. Urban areas tend to go left leaning. And so, this is an area that, traditionally has been a Democratic stronghold in the state of Virginia as well as Northern Virginia. So what they would do is they would take a county in like Henrico County or a county in surrounding Richmond that is, typically left-leaning, filled with a lot of registered Democrats, and they would cut it into a half, a third, a quarter, whatever the case may be, and then dilute it with large swaths of rural area that typically lean right of center, and do it so much so that it creates, in an area that makes absolutely no sense. You've got the rural farmers, you've got rural communities that have their issues, and then you have urban areas that have their issues. And then you're going to make one congressional district out of that. It doesn't make any fucking sense. The only reason to do that is to dilute those left-leaning votes and create an environment that allows for, a relatively solid Republican district.
Yep. And
it hurts both sides. It hurts the constituents on the right. It hurts the constituents on the left.
Yeah, we actually had a couple questions similar to this one. I'll kind of tie these two together. Why do people keep saying progressives are violent? And then this one basically says, but Democrats are also leaning on the narrative progressives are violent. Why?
Democrats are leaning on the narrative that progressives are violent. I mean, listen, both political parties or both sides of the political aisle have their, their extremists. That being said, I mean, I think that if you look back at the past 10 years, really ever since Donald Trump, walked down the golden escalator, you've seen a huge spike in political violence in this country, and the perpetrators are unequivocally individuals that ascribe to far right or right of center politics. I mean, that's not to say that there haven't been examples in which people that ascribe to, left-leaning political ideology have engaged in acts of violence. Prior to that, we saw acts of violence throughout the country during the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of those, I think there was a misconception, and this is coming from a law enforcement perspective. You had individuals with really no political ideology who would embed themselves in those protests and then engage in violent actions against law enforcement. And law enforcement was aware of this. We knew these groups that would infiltrate these legitimate protests to commit acts of violence against police. And then, if a entertainment news or media organization like Fox News would use, images of that to say that, there's violence on the left. My experience, violence on the left during my tenure in law enforcement really was revolved around environmental terrorism. Those were the organizations, and we didn't have that in Washington D.C. because there's no fucking trees there. But you would see that's what we would learn about, and that's what we would see in intelligence briefings and things like that. But if you go through, again, going back to 2015, 2016, obviously, you've got some pretty significant examples of large scale acts of violence that were incited and inspired and funded by this administration, by Donald Trump and by his enablers and his supporters. January 6th comes to mind. But you also have a situation in which political leaders advocate for political violence. Donald Trump, out of one side of his mouth, will say "fight like hell," and he'll make these off the cuff remarks. Like, I don't know if you guys remember during his first campaign, there was a protester in the crowd. He's like, somebody punched that guy in the face, or when they spit, we hit. All of these little dog whistles, and many of them are beyond that. They're overt. He's telling his supporters to commit acts of violence on his behalf. And then, let's not forget that he pardoned like 1,500 violent insurrectionists that attacked the Capitol on January 6th, sending a clear and concise message to his supporters that even if you do commit acts of violence on my behalf and you're arrested and you're prosecuted and you're convicted, I'll absolve you of all criminal culpability. And we've seen that pattern play out throughout his tenure as president. He uses his pardoning power to absolve people who commit crimes on his behalf or who have committed crimes and that their criminal expertise, like the crypto fucking people, may benefit him, going down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a great Atlantic article that if you just search on Google, 40 instances of quotes that Trump has given that are extremely violent and or inciting violence or suggesting violence or
he calls his political opponents vermin and says they need to be cleansed from the face of the earth. He talked about putting Liz Cheney in front of a firing squad.
Yeah,
it's just this both sidesism. It's not even fucking close. It's just not close. And the other thing too is that while there might be violence that's could be loosely attributed to left-leaning politics, it's not coming from the mouths of Democratic politicians. You don't see Jamie Raskin out there telling you to fucking go fight like hell and fucking, beat the shit out of your political opponents. It just doesn't happen.
No.
Here's a question. It says, thoughts on the Iran Lego videos, one of the latest links, Teal and Vance to Epstein.
Yeah, this is a trick question, I feel like. Listen, I got a lot of friends that are active duty military and that are former military. Many of them are serving right now. Some of them are overseas, either awaiting deployment into Iran, or maybe fucking, for all I know, they're already there. It's very hard for me to celebrate or even laugh at propaganda coming from what is our adversary or our enemy. That being said, I believe that this war is completely illegal. It's unethical. It's immoral. We have absolutely no business there. There was no existential threat against America. This administration has lied unequivocally, time and time again. I think that if the reporting is accurate, the administration is engaged in war crimes. But have I looked at them and fucking laughed, especially the ones that are directed at specific individuals like Pete Hegseth or fucking Donald Trump? I laughed my ass off because fuck both those guys. And it's like, yeah, that's my simple answer.
Yeah, succinct enough. How could the correspondence dinner shooter be fake? How would that work? Is he being set up?
Listen, we talked about this last week when we were on, Andrew. We addressed the social media rumors of was like the Pennsylvania assassination attempt, like was that a false flag? Like from a law enforcement perspective, I always tend to err on the side of gross negligence. Do I have a lot of questions about Butler, Pennsylvania? I have a lot of questions about Butler, Pennsylvania. And I find it, highly suspicious that, this person that attempted to assassinate the president of the United States, like in the aftermath, we know nothing about them whatsoever. And for what it seems, if you believe people like Joe Kent that left the administration, who has come out publicly and said that, he was denied access to the investigation or to participate in the investigation, and his position, as a national security advisor that pertains to national security. I think there's a lot of questions. I think that from what I've seen with this, incident at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, because I'll be honest with you, dude, like I've scoured the news and social media, and I've yet to see evidence that he actually fired a shot.
Yeah.
And so, like, I hesitate to call it a shooting. I mean, certainly he was shot at.
The round going into the guy's vest.
Yeah,
he says because I think that the guy was behind him, and it seemed like he was just sprinting. So unless he accidentally hit the trigger, but
I don't have enough of the facts to sit here and give like a real assessment. And I mean, I take those things seriously, given the fact that I did spend 20 years as a law enforcement officer. I don't want to just sit here and speculate and come across as a fucking, talking a bunch of shit. There's plenty of other topics that I could just run my mouth about with absolutely no, legitimate background in and just be whatever. But this one is, near and dear to me. Yeah. I just think it was gross incompetence. And you can sit there and you can blame the, these individual agents that were there. But having, for those of you who don't know, one of the many jobs that I tried, got involved in after I left the police department was I'd started a security company that is now defunct. But we did a lot of these types of events, very similar, if not identical, to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And we had many, many, many Secret Service protectees attend our events, worked with the Secret Service. And, what I saw from the security posture was no different from the one time that I attended the White House Correspondents' Dinner several years back. You can easily access the hotel. There's no security perimeter to gain access. And the reason for that is that for this particular event, which, by the way, is not a White House event, it's the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is not the White House. The president is simply a guest. As why they would decide that they're going to invite the entire fucking cabinet and the entire chain of, presidential command and is absolutely and utterly fucking ridiculous. Like, it's insane that you would put all those people in the same room. And that's not the Secret Service. That's Donald Trump and his insane clown posse of, officials at the White House. Yeah. That being said, I mean, it's, once you go into the hotel, every guest is credentialed. You make your way down a set of escalators to kind of like what is like the interior or the inner perimeter. And that's where you have to cross through magnetometers. Why they were breaking down those magnetometers so early into the event and not maintaining more of an aggressive posture at those access points, I think is a security failure that really speaks to whoever was supervising and planning the security for that event. That person should be fired. The individual agents, again, like breaking down the security perimeter is certainly going to, they themselves are going to take a similar posture when they're breaking down the equipment that's meant to screen individuals going in. And so, yeah, I just think it's another example of a security failure under this administration, because again, it's Donald Trump that chooses leadership for the Secret Service, and ultimately is responsible for the security of these events.
Yeah, and it's a difficult place to. It is not Secret Service's job to provide security for the entire building. That is right. Outside the scope.
They're there to protect the protectees. I mean, we would always talk about this all the time because, when I would have clients that would host these giant events, they're like, oh, well, we're going to have the vice president there, and so there'll be Secret Service. And I'm like, listen, you don't understand. Secret Service is not going to protect the entire event. If somebody comes in there, they're going to protect their protectee, and that's it. Everybody else is on their own.
Yeah.
And so that's why I would say, like, you need to have supplemental security. You need to have other security apparatus that's there to protect the attendees.
Yeah, and then just keep the barricade up and make it more difficult. Like, even if there is a set of double doors before you go to the magnetometer room, have that closed. Have once the event is started, and have security officials posted with weapons, and just create a visual deterrent. And it shouldn't be that easy. But also, people should not be afraid in a democracy to be able to go to public events. If you are administration officials, this Hilton has been used for decades. There's a ton of precedents, and it's just a risk of democracy that people could try to do something, but there's still security failures at play.
And I want to bring this up too, because I think this is an interesting take on the conspiracy theories that surround all of these incidents. Listen, conspiracy theories always exist, but typically they exist in like the far corners of Reddit and, the deep dives on, these chat forums and whatnot. I watched Don Lemon the other day do his Man of the People thing, where he just went out on the streets and talked to regular New Yorkers, average folks. And not one single person thought that what happened was real. They thought it was a false flag. So Donald Trump has literally created an environment, A, in which this type of political violence is normal, and B, his administration is so full of shit that when these things happen, whether credible or not, whether real or not, nobody cares and nobody believes it. And I said this back when, the Butler assassination, that if those of you don't remember, that didn't even make it through 24-hour news cycle. And I said before, I was like, Donald Trump has created an environment where the news, there's so much chaos in this administration. There's so much chaos surrounding Donald Trump that nobody even gives a shit when somebody tries to shoot him. And that's how it is. I mean, you ask the vast majority of Americans today, they either don't believe it or they don't care.
The central premise of a conspiracy theory is oftentimes the idea that it is brilliant competence at play.
Yeah.
If there's anything that I can tell you about our experience and seeing how the sausage is made, it is that it's like, what is it going to be? That people are so incompetent that they make all these fuck ups, or that they're like these brilliant mustache twirling masterminds? You see it yourself every day. Like it's fucking chaos.
The other thing that I found it interesting, and this is just kind of, some weird thoughts that I had the other day, but we were talking about like the pardoning of all these people for seditious conspiracy, like the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and whatnot. These are violent extremist groups, and it's the leadership of those violent extremist groups. With the exception of Enrique Tarrio, all of them have publicly cut ties with Donald Trump, whether it was over the Epstein files, whether it was over, the Iran war, whatever their, issue du jour was with regards to this administration. And so now what Donald Trump has done is he's literally released people that hate him because they recognize the fact that, either we were bamboozled from the get-go or we fought for him, sacrificed, spent time in jail, lost our jobs, lost families, whatever. And he didn't turn out to be the person that he purported himself to be. And now you let these violent motherfuckers out into the, streets. And those are the guys who understand the psyops behind all of this. They know how to perpetuate these types of conspiracy theories online. I mean, the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and the 3%ers literally thrived on Q and QAnon and all that fucking insanity. And now you're letting them back out there, and they hate the fucking president. And they've got an axe to grind. Probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. Maybe you should have just kept those motherfuckers locked up.
I mean, and it takes that's gallons of spilled milk to get those guys not fucking like you anymore. So, again, talking about his competence, or he can't even keep the people who are willing to start, foment and carry out an insurrection on his side. Like that's bad politics.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't be afraid of like some, leftist trans, shooter. I'd be worried about the fucking Proud Boy that literally lost everything supporting Donald Trump, and just received a pardon and is now free, but yet can't get a job because the vast majority of America recognizes him for what he is, a traitor to the country. Sees his violent history and won't give him a job. The wife that divorced him, or the girlfriend that left him, the family members that don't want to talk to him and disassociated with him. And now that guy's got nothing left to lose, and has an excuse to hate Donald Trump because Donald Trump has proven to be the polar opposite of everything that he promised those people.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right, maybe just one more, Andrew.
Yeah, there's a couple of these that tie together pretty well. What do you do for self-care, and what keeps you inspired?
Self-care. I'd be honest with you, I gotta work on that. I go to the gym every day. That's pretty much all I have. Yeah.
Buddy and Harold, Modelo.
I got my dogs. I'll be honest with you, like I live like a pretty like physically healthy lifestyle, mentally very unhealthy lifestyle. But it's just it's the nature of I think it's the nature of, like, I spent 2 decades as a law enforcement officer. I still see myself very much so as kind of in that lane, but I'm not, and I don't have that job anymore, and I don't have that option to return to that job anymore. I'm in this space, and I'm not really comfortable here, and I gravitate towards authenticity and authentic people, and that doesn't in this space there's not a lot of that. Which is why you see me doing lives with my brother and with Andrew rather than to some fucking politician or celebrity. I mean, also they probably wouldn't fucking come on the show, but
well, we've had them on the show.
We've had them on the show, and like my second book will be all about the bridges I've burned and relationships that I've torched, because I just I honestly believe in what we're doing. And to me, the mission is foremost. Now I got to fucking earn a living, and I've got a family to feed, and I have 4 daughters that depend on me, and 2 dogs. and an ex-wife. And this is not an easy space to navigate, especially when there's no blueprint and I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And so it's like paycheck to paycheck, struggling. And, I'll be honest with you, like a lot of the folks that said that they were, friends and that would be there to support me in this journey aren't fucking there. You're looking at the only two that have really been consistent. And that's my brother and Andrew. And so, like when I talk to a therapist and I'm just like, these are my fucking problems, solve that shit. And they're like, there's no solution. You just need to, I don't know, man, have a beer and go to the gym more. There's just nothing you can really do. Like, hopefully one day, like I can find some stability and that'll be my, that'll be how I,
yeah, because their next patient is they had to cut your session short because they had the Rubik's Cube next, and that was an easier journey.
What was it? What we got? One more.
Deirdre was asking if Harold's still revenge shitting on your floor.
No, man. Harold has like been he's been clean for like months. I can't even remember the last time. Now he's gonna crap on my floor like right this moment. But no, he's been super good, and they're great. They're good. They're good dogs.
So I just wanted to, since we're finishing up here, we're going to be consistent about these lives happening every Wednesday at 3. We are revamping a lot of stuff, trying to create more of a central hub for you all to engage with us. Mike's going to be engaging on socials, more, organic, like spur of the moment stuff, raw, like what you see on the lives. And then, if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, for those who are joining us from other platforms, definitely subscribe to that. And Mike's takes are really in depth, and he's really good at providing a 30,000 foot view and a no BS view of what's going on. I think any other announcements for right now?
All I would say is that, if you guys could, I know you guys are loyal listeners, and I see a lot of the same folks every time we do these things or any of the events that I'm online with. But if you could share them with other folks, that are in your circle and help us to build our following, that would be greatly appreciated. We're running on fumes.
Running on fumes. We have 1 million subscribers across platforms, but we want the level of engagement, and we want our YouTube to get to 1 million, so that's when people start coming to us and saying it just gives you a level of power to actually drive the conversation and not be responsive to the conversation, but actually be making it. But we're doing great. Mike's doing great. Thank you all for your support. And till next week.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. Have a good one, guys.
See you guys.
See you.